We are blessed with stories. Stories of our history, ours and our ancestors. Stories of our faith community, of God's faithful love of God's people, and how we less faithfully returned that love. Stories of exile and homecoming. Stories of ancient past and last week. Stories that are personal and shared traditions. We are blessed with stories, and we bless others when we share. The disciples came up to Jesus and asked, "Why do you tell stories?" He replied, "You've been given insight into God's kingdom. You know how it works. Not everybody has this gift, this insight. It hasn't been given to them. That's why I tell stories, to create readiness, to nudge the people towards receptive insight. That is why we too tell stories. In doing so, we sow the seeds of faith." Immediately, Jesus commanded the disciples to get into the boat and go out ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he dismissed the crowds, he went up into the mountains alone to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the disciples in the boat were far from shore, being beaten by the waves because the wind was against them. In the 4th hour of the watch, Jesus came to them walking on the sea. Now, when they saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and they cried out, "It's a ghost!" Jesus immediately said to them, "Take heart, I am. Do not be afraid." Well, then Peter said, "Well, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you walking on the water." And Jesus said, "Well, come on." And so Peter got out of the boat and he began to walk on the water to Jesus. But then he saw the strong winds and he began to sink. And he cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and he caught him. And he said, "Oh, you've little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got back into the boat, the seas immediately quieted. And those in the boat worshiped him and said, "Surely you are the Son of God."
There's that one Hershov quote, that's, one night in an open boat in a thunderstorm will bring you closer to God than 40 Sundays. Because the power of nature and just how rough water can be, and just toss your little boat and make whatever boat you're on feel like a little boat. I remember most of the time being downstairs because Dad didn't want me topside because he was really worried about my safety because the storms were really bad.
So you were like 14.
Well, there's a couple of times up there and I tried to check on you all. Yeah, I was 14. Yeah, and I go up and check on you guys, and the lightning was flashing so bright and so frequently. I never got the searing pink out of my eyesight until I went back inside the engine went back inside the boat, and it was just like, okay, it's not worth going out there to ask what's going on. It's pitch black when I opened the hatch to see if you guys were okay, and then if it wasn't pitch black, it was bright red because of the lightning being so close and so bright. And then trying to get your night vision to come back with that much thunder and lightning going on, it just wasn't happening. So I never really actually saw you guys. I just had to trust that you guys were out there. I think occasionally I might have heard something, but the wind was howling. The rain was super loud. So I busied myself inside with trying to stay safe, and that wasn't necessarily the easiest thing. Because we had this 40-foot boat. It was only about 12 feet wide, and there were times where the waves just picked us up and tossed us, is what it felt like. I know it probably wasn't actually that, but as the waves slammed against the hull, you sort of would lose your footing, and then you would go flying into things. So we spent a lot of time just trying to put stuff up every time that we went through one of these storms. And there's nothing you can do, and there's nothing to do in a storm, and all you have is just to hold on. It is probably the scariest thing, because you feel like you are not, you were entirely at the fate of this storm, and whoever else is driving the boat. So when you're downstairs and you're not doing stuff, every time the boat lurches, every time it shakes, you just really get this idea that you are not in control. And you can feel that if the storm had its way, you wouldn't be there anymore. But the times where we had thunderstorms come up and I was driving or driving the boat or up top side where I could do something, I always felt like I had some agency in it, and that I could control the outcome, sort of. But when you're not doing that, you can't lie to yourself that you could, oh, I can beat this storm, I got this. No, you don't. And that becomes very, very real. So there's this emotional sort of like, oh God, are we going to be there tomorrow? Yeah, there's this primal sort of terror that the ocean and that a storm can sort of raise up in a sailor. That it's no wonder back in the day they were all super superstitious about stuff. Yeah, so it's like being in a washing machine, and not in the fun way. If there's a fun way with being in a washing machine, it's really bad. It's really topsy-turvy. And to think that someone could just stroll out there, because you're having waves moving up and moving things around. And, I always, when I would listen to the story, I always pictured it as he just walked out there and the waves went around him and he wasn't even bothered by it. They were just like, no, we're not bothering him. We're just gonna, this idea that someone could even, just walk out there and not be at all tossed or thrown about by nature.
So that's why I identify with Peter as going, wow, he was really brave, because he's going, Lord, if it is you, command me to come and walk on the sea towards you. And Jesus says, well, come on out, and Peter, and he starts walking, right? And then he starts looking around and going, uh-oh, and that's when he sinks.
Wait a minute. Yeah, and the other idea, though, is that if you were overboard in seas like that, getting that person back is not going to happen, because you barely can control the boat, let alone come back around and get them up.
That's really cool.
And so, he walks out there and he starts, and he goes, wait a minute, I shouldn't be doing this. And then he sinks. And at that moment, the terror that has to be going through Peter's mind of like, I'm out of the boat. They're never going to find me. I'm going to die. I'm not going to be able to survive out here. Even when the water's flat calm, there's only so long you can swim before the water takes all of your heat, and the water takes all of your energy, and the water takes you. But, here's Peter. He walks out there with no life preserver, no tether, no harness, just out there. And then he sinks into the water, and then he's like, I'm done for. And, and Jesus comes along and, plucks him out by his collar and says, no, come on. What are you doing? Like, this isn't, and the idea that Jesus could have this like perspective of this isn't hard. For this sort of thing to not be hard. Like, I don't understand why you're having a trouble with this. You should just do what I say, believe in me, and here we are. I've had that reaction for things that aren't even remotely as scary. Mm-hmm. You're right. There's definitely be a thing of like just absolute bravery for a brief second, probably followed by, oh what have I done?
Yeah, really.
Followed by, followed by absolute relief when someone actually came and plucked him out of the surf and put him back on the boat, and he'd just be like, this is a roller coaster of emotions that I don't think. Yeah, I have a hard time fathoming, just because I don't think I would have been brave enough to do it in the first place. When you're out in a storm, like 5 minutes feels like forever too. So this entire time as they're getting tossed around, they're just, you're constantly wondering, is the boat gonna hold? Mm-hmm. Even if the boat's gonna hold, you're like, the part of the little voice in the back of your head goes, you sure about that? You sure the boat's gonna hold? And then on a larger ship, when you go over waves and you get that, sometimes if it's really bad, you can feel this every time it just pounds in, the surf pounds into the boat, or the other way around, and the ship just shudders. And then you're like, I know it's made out of steel, but I'm really kind of wondering if I'm gonna. It really feels like something's gonna break. Or it's made out of, our boat was made out of really thick plywood and fiberglass. Like, it felt like if you were driving it around during the daytime, sunlight and happiness and rainbows and puppies, it felt like that it was a tank. And then you drive this thing out into a storm and you're like, oh gosh, this thing's gonna break up. Because you suddenly, all of this idea that, oh man, this really strong boat, right, really thick hull, it's all good, and then it just instantly gone as soon as the surf kicks up, as soon as the waves kick up and the wind kicks up, and then you have rain coming at from all the angles, like Forrest Gump would talk about. Yeah, it's always this fear that's the back of your mind as a sailor, and most of the time you don't pay it any mind, because most of the time you're not in a situation where that doubt can creep in. But and a thunderstorm would do that.
Maybe that was important for Jesus, for the disciples to really experience that chaos and that fear, so that they could really appreciate his coming and walking on the water. And then when he gets into the boat, the wind immediately dies down.
Right. And this the total absolute authority.
Yeah, and then they worshiped him. Right? Surely you are the Son of God.
Yeah, because at that, they're kind of. I would probably have been like, "Wait, who are you again? Can we go back from the top and go over this? Because I don't think I've been listening."
Any other thoughts about that you would add to that, or because this has been great, so it's okay to say this is it.
I would also point out that in a really bad storm, for them to be able to see him from coming from far away as he walked up, there had to have been something else about that, like an otherworldly sort of like
a glow
thing about that, because either a glow or
lightning?
Lightning or something like that. So them to realize that somebody was out there, if it almost sounds like it would be straight out of a horror story at first. So you totally get why they're going,
suspicious. He's a ghost. Yeah,
it's a ghost, or it's a monster, or it's a demon, or it's something else, that it's not God, because it's not the guy we know, clearly, because that's not something a person can do.
Yeah, so I don't know, you weren't up top when your dad was driving the boat and it was in a really bad storm, and this guy appears in a panga that is like right off our bow, and Dad had to turn, and this panga it was up on the top of this wave, and we never saw him again, you know. But that
Yeah.
flash of lightning, and we could see him, and then he was gone. Yeah.
Yeah, and come to think about it, we never really saw anybody during the day either. Like if we saw boats during the day, they were like far off and they were all going inside, you know. And we never really saw. I mean, Ponga's a very low profile boat,
Right.
and it's entirely made out of fiber, out of styrofoam. So it's like a really large Boston whaler.
Mm-hmm.
So you know they're impossible to sink, mostly. They're not impossible to break, but if they're all together, they're almost impossible to sink. So we never saw this guy, and we never saw him again.
Yeah.
And I know I wasn't up top, but I remember my dad screaming.
Yeah. That
Just,
was,
you know.
yeah,
because
you're fighting the waves anyway, and you're trying not to go 90 degrees into the wave, and then you go, oh gosh, I can't hit this other boat, you know. And you think about, and so it was,
yeah. So that battle for control, and then suddenly trying to like panic, and because your first thought would be like, oh, that's a person, there's a boat there. So they would have to have also realized there wasn't a boat there.
Yeah.
So at first they're like, oh, it's somebody else, we're gonna be okay. And then there's no boat there, we're not gonna be okay, this is something scary. And then, you know, then Peter's like, oh, you know, it's all right, guys. Yeah, it's nothing. And then here, I'll prove it. And then he, you know, says, you know, it kind of looks, someone probably said it kind of looks like Jesus. And he's like, it's nothing, I'll prove it. You know, if Lord, if it's you, command me and I'll come out to you. And he goes, yeah, see, nothing happened. And then he's like, come on out. So he goes, oh, okay. And wait. Yeah. So it's definitely a thing that you words fail to describe the abject terror that being on a boat without any control can bring. And it's definitely akin to torture. I would say that's probably the closest thing. Yeah. Now that I think about it, that's definitely the closest thing I would compare it to. It's a mental torture beyond some things. Definitely.
I apologize for torturing you.
Hey,
by carrying you out to sea.
Honestly, everything I've ever been through, according to my therapist, you all aren't the problem for it.
And so we come before you and pray the prayer that your Son taught us to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. We have been so blessed by God. Let us give back to God as we give our tithe and offering. How do we do that? Well, click on the donate button on the front of our web pages. Or you can mail us a check. You plant seeds every single day in the world and in others, with every thought you think and word you speak and action you take. You have influence. You're making a dent in the universe, and you matter in a very real way. Go in God's peace. Amen.
Come on, let it soar. I am planting seeds and nothing more.